know, older Asian people care about status a lot. Like everyone cares about status in a certain level, but I feel like for Asians, like that's how they rank themselves, right? Like less about moral good, generally it's like, how does this benefit me within the context of the group, right? Kind of thing. And how to communicate through that and use language that they'll understand is, I think that's the hard part to crack, right? Because for millennials and boomers, right, like we may use different languages or ideologies might be different. And I think there hasn't really been a good way to communicate in styles that resonate with each other's groups, which I think causes a lot of tension, right? Overall, like I was watching this show, or I was watching this interview with Bowen Yang and Yul Kwan. So Bowen Yang, obviously Asian comedian. Yul Kwan, I think winner on Survivor. I think it was like season 3 or something like that. And he was saying how his parents wouldn't acknowledge that he was a Survivor winner. It didn't matter, right? Like even though he won $1 million, he was on TV, he had his time to shine. Didn't matter, right? But when he was written in his local Korean newspaper that he was a winner, then his parents had something to brag about, right? And that's when they acknowledged it, right? So it's really about meeting parents, I think, at the local level of, having status among their friends, right? Or, kind of how we were saying, we talk about Jokoi, right? Like they don't think he's funny, but he's he's the hero, right? Like that you're going to hang your hat on, right? If all else fails. So it's really about communication styles, I think, at the end of the day, when communicating between generations.
What's hard is that I agree. Why cannot that uh I so badly want these generations to be able to expand what they care about.
It's hard, right? Because it's so community rooted, right? Like another example I'll use, weddings, perfect example, right? Um, Oftentimes, depending on your family's generation, right? Sometimes they'll be more heavy-handed at weddings, right? They'll say like, you need to have X, Y, Z, right? You need to have this, you need to have that, you need to invite this person. Let me ask you this. Do you think it's for the couple's benefit?
No.
Yeah. Whose benefit it's for? It's really just so the parents can show off to other parents, right? To show that like they have status, right? Like that, or not they have status, but like that they're putting on a show, right? Like they're putting on, like, we can provide, right? It's a game of song and dance, and that's something that's really important that's embedded in the culture, right? For some generations, um, and it's a communication style. Like with me and my girlfriend, um, we've talked about like, hey, like, so my family, like, they're not really embedded with like, hey, you have to have a Chinese wedding or anything like that. But in talking with my girlfriend, I'm like, I already know there's going to be certain things that she's going to want, well, that her mom's going to want, right? And I'm probably going to have to abide by it, right? Because, is she willing to risk her reputation and her relationship with her mom, her aunties, or uncles over this, right? And like sometimes you kind of have to cater to it a little bit. Not saying that you can't, right? And you don't have to, but there realistically potentially could be consequences, like consequences of, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but maybe disownment, or families having a grudge because you made them look bad because there wasn't certain elements that uh, weren't there, right? Maybe in a wedding, right? That made them look worse in front of other people. So I think there's like that element of balancing out the reality versus idealism. And, especially in a lot of like Asian movies, Asian American movies, I have noticed that the parents sometimes do say, I love you, right? Or the grandparents say, I love you. But when I ask like, other people, it's like, if you had your grandparents watch that, do you think they'll say, I love you? They're just like, no. It's just like a lot of it is ideal, right? It's idealism versus reality. And that's either what makes a good story, um, but yeah, that's something I kind of been thinking about. I talk about it with my girlfriend sometimes, and we talk about the differences between, you know, the what we want as millennials, because a lot of these media stories, they're not meant for our grandparents, right? Crazy Rich Asians isn't meant for our grandparents necessarily, like to change their ideals. It's really a reflection of what we wish that we kind of have, but it also identifies with the struggles that we have by putting the grandparents, like the best and worst qualities, right, as the characters, but also what we idealize kind of sometimes our grandparents, what we want them to be as well.
I have so many thoughts right now.
But yeah, that was my take.
Yeah, oh, man, many thoughts on weddings. I appreciate your take, and I think it's humbling for me to hear that that's just part of your calculus of, well, what things will I be able to negotiate, and what is it that that you have to abide by. When I think about my proverbial wedding in the future, I actually very much am about kind of this collectivist perspective. That a wedding is not all about me and the bride. It is absolutely about the family. And I think it can be seen from the perspective of, like people got to save face, and this is about protecting and communicating one's status. But I also see it from the perspective of honoring the people who you have invited and who have helped raise you and get you to where you are now. I have experienced weddings where I have been quite disappointed in how they have not kind of considered the family aspect of it. And it's been, I don't know, it has kind of weighed heavy on me. And that's just how I see family gatherings, as it is not about any one or two particular people. There's a reason why people are invited, and it's because we take care of each other. And so I think it's just a part of the whole of it.
It's because of the money, right? Like I hear in back channels, right? Like, oh, invite this person, they're rich, right? Invite this person, right? They'll give you more money, right, for your wedding, right? Like it also becomes like this, strategic economic element as well. Not to derail from like, honoring family and stuff like that. But there is also kind of the family politics and strategizing, behind it.
100%.
One thing I was thinking about recently was, I don't know, have you seen Encanto?
I have. Yes.
I recently just saw it. I recently just saw it, and it really made, because the whole story is about family, right? And there's obviously intergenerational trauma. There's a relationship between the abuela and Maribel and the rest of her family. And the interesting thing that got me thinking about family was that it's both supportive and constrictive, right? At the same time. Like it can be both. And I think it's really about managing both sides of it. Like, and especially because we live in America, I think that also adds another complexity to it. And I was talking about this with my girlfriend recently too, which was, here in America, you can be individualistic, right? Like if you wanted to discard your family, not discard your family, but if you wanted to like be your own person and you wanted to survive on your own and have an estranged relationship with your family in order to do what you want to do, right? Like, you can do it, right? Like, it's part of being an individualistic culture. Um, but like, let's say if this same person, grew up, I don't know, let's just say in the Philippines, for example, you're not in a culture that would encourage that, right? Like, because you would still need your family for a lot of things. And I think it's so interesting, as Asian Americans, that we live in this duality of almost opposing ideals. And sometimes it's hard to find that common ground for people of different generations to understand each other, just from those viewpoints.
I appreciate that perspective.